Action!
Ce grand réalisateur hollywoodien a débuté sa carrière avec THX 1138, œuvre futuriste produite par Francis Ford Coppola. Il enchaîne avec American Graffiti, un petit film qui à ce jour a rapporté 115 millions de dollars, puis viendra La Guerre des Étoiles, véritable phénomène qui bouleverse l'ordre intergalactique. Premier film à rapporter plus de 300 millions de dollars, générant 2 suites et 3 préquels.
Hi, this is George Lucas and welcome to Hollywood's luckiest directors. I went to USC Film School. I didn't know anything about making movies. I was an anthropology major, and I went there my junior year and was interested in photography, was interested in going to art school, but my father wouldn't have anything to do with it. So I figured there would be some photography in the School of Cinematography, which is what it was, School of Cinema. And I didn't even realize you could go to school to learn how to make movies. And I hadn't really paid much attention to movies, and I didn't have television until I was like 10 or 11 years old. By that time I was sort of getting interested in cars and things, so it wasn't something I thought about, but once I got there and I saw what it was and I got exposed to the movies, I got exposed to the process, I realized very quickly that I knew how to do this and I knew how to do it well, and I loved it. So within a semester, a few months, I'd made an award-winning movie and I was on my way. It was something you look at all the student films and what everybody was doing and what I wanted to do, and I would make a film. And, I didn't obviously know that I was that good when I started, but I say literally within a couple months, I'd made a film that won a dozen international film festivals. And everybody else, and this was in a beginning class. I said, well, I know how to do this. This is easy. Then the next semester, I did a couple of more movies. One was a beginning project on somebody trying to escape East Germany. It was about freedom. Another one was a little tone poem. I was very much into alternative filmmaking. I came from San Francisco. I was very much into the Canyon cinema movement. That is what I did do. I didn't really go to movies and do television, but I did come up to San Francisco and hang out in kind of the beat clubs and go to Canyon Cinema films, and they were very experimental, very advanced kind of tone poems, you'd call them, but sometimes very emotional, interesting.
I brought you here, now what?
I left, became an editor, became a cameraman, worked for a while, wasn't happy, decided I'd go back to school and see if I could get a master's degree in cinema so that I could also direct movies. So I went back, but before I did that, I got a chance to go back to school and teach a class as a teaching assistant in photography. And so I did that with US Navy, and in the process of that class, I made a film called THX. And that began, all the films won awards, but that one won a huge number of awards. And then after that, I went to school, made a couple other movies for a semester, and then won a lot of scholarships based on the films, based on everything. One to work with Carl Foreman on a film called McKenna's Gold at Columbia Studios. Another one to work with Francis Coppola at Warner Brothers Studio on a film called Finian's Rainbow. At that point, I had no interest at all in doing theatrical films. I was not interested at all. I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. That's what I wanted to do. That's how I was working. I liked editing. I liked photography, and I wanted to work as an editor and photographer and do cinema verite documentaries, which was the new thing at that point. And then at the same time, on the side, do these little artsy, kind of tone poem, non-linear, non-character driven, non-story driven films. That was my passion. But I won these scholarships and I said, well, I should see what this Hollywood thing is all about. I might as well just, it's an opportunity, might as well take it. So I did, and out of that, became Francis Coppola's assistant, and from that, worked with him on The Rain People. We came back to San Francisco, which is where I wanted to live, because that's where I'm from, and we started a film company up here, and Francis managed to get a deal to make a feature version of THX, and I figured, well, it's a crazy, artsy, tone poem thing, but the industry is in such turmoil now, I think I might have a chance to actually make it. And I did. You know, I managed to get the film made, and they didn't see it or read the script or anything. And when they saw it, they hated it. But up to that point, I managed to actually get the movie made. The original idea was done by a friend of mine, Walter Murch, and a friend of his, Matt Robbins, who were working on their senior workshop. And they came up with the idea of a man trying to escape a futuristic city, which was about all it was. And then they decided not to do it for the senior workshop. So then I had a chance to teach this class, and I was saying, gosh, I'm going to come up with a movie, because I split the class in half. One part of the class made a movie, and then the other part made one with me. And I was talking to them, they were good friends of mine, and I said, I'm going to do a film, and they said, well, we got this thing, what about a guy trapped in a city, and he's underground, and he can't get out. And I don't think it was even underground then. I think it was just a guy trapped in a futuristic city, and I liked that idea, so I said, okay. THX was basically not a futuristic movie. It was about it was sort of a parable about the way we were living today.
Action!
American Graffiti, again, started with Francis saying to me, do a comedy. You know, if you're going to go stay in the movie business. So I said, well, okay, I can do a comedy. I know how to do that. I've never done one before. But I said, you know, I'd always wanted to do a film about cruising, which is the way I grew up, what I did in Modesto. That's what I did when I was in high school. And again, when I took anthropology, I realized that mating rituals in the United States were extremely unique, because the same kind of ritual that goes on in most countries, where the boys either sit on the benches and watch the girls parade around, or the girls sit on the benches and watch the boys parade around, and that's the way they met. In the United States, they all did it in cars, which, you know, in the 50s and 60s was unheard of in the rest of the world. No teenager could afford a car. And so it was a very unique kind of thing. So I took that and said, you know, it would be nice to document this particular thing, this particular ritual that existed really from the 30s up until the 70s. And so that was the impetus of it. And I loved the music, and I loved radio, and I loved disc jockeys, and that's how I really came to the story.
Okay, cut it. And.
The mic was in frame.
The thing about the first film, which was always episode 4, A New Hope, in order to write that, because I wanted to start in the middle, which I like to do, I had to write a backstory. I had to say where all these people came from. What was the rebellion? What was the Empire? Where did the Empire came from? Who were the Jedi? What did the Jedi do? Who was Darth Vader? Where did he come from? You know, that's all the story. But that was all backstory. So I had to write all that in order just to get to writing the overlong script. But I never intended that to be part of the movie. I always intended that just to be how I got there. But then when I had to do the film in 3 pieces, it kind of dissolved or dissipated the impact of Darth Vader, the tragedy of Darth Vader. People didn't see it because he was such a powerful figure. And so I kept thinking, gee, you know, it's too bad people don't see the irony of this whole thing, because I thought it was there. But then when you spread it out, it kind of dissipates to the point where it's not there. So I said, and the other part is I wrote the backstory. The Star Wars itself was written very, very carefully around the technology I had that I could make the movie. I knew, and I would pick like one technological breakthrough that I had to get overcome in order to, in the case of the first film, make it cinematic, make it move, be able to pan with spaceships, to be able to create a fast-paced editorial space battle. But I had to figure out how to do that. But coming from animation, I had some ideas, and I thought, I think I can overcome this. But the story was written very carefully of how I was going to accomplish it financially and technologically. And each one of those was done that way. The backstory, I didn't think about that. The backstory was written like a piece of literature. you know, just blue sky dreaming. Well, and then they go to Coruscant, and there's 100,000 spaceships, and then there's, you know, all kinds of, and then the Clone Wars and a thing, and they battle. And, you know, I couldn't make that into a movie. I mean, forget it. I could barely get Star Wars, which really takes place in like 3 rooms. I mean, it doesn't seem like it, but that's basically what it is. And I was trying to even think about it. But then, in the process of doing Star Wars, I advanced technology. I had started a special effects company, and I kept pushing the special effects company. They created more and more technology. I had started with Star Wars to use some computers. We started to continue to use those computers. I started a computer company to help develop technology to make films. And then we did things like, you know, Young Sherlock Holmes, which had a digital character, and then we did the Terminator movies, which had digital characters, and then finally we did Jurassic Park, which was really a huge breakthrough for Industrial Light and Magic, and we really were making very realistic characters digitally. And once we accomplished that, I said, hey, you know, if I wanted to go back now and make that backstory, it's actually possible, because before it was just not even thinkable. So, you know, I could probably do this now. So then I started thinking about it, and eventually came back. After Return of the Jedi, I had just gotten divorced. I had a 1-year-old daughter that I had adopted, and I said, I'm really going to retire now. And it was a point in my career where I could have really taken over the world, because I was at the top of the directorial heap. I could do anything I wanted. I had kind of, you know, I had that moment in time, and I just said, look, I'm more excited about raising my daughter than I am about making another movie. So I took 15 years off, adopted 2 other kids, raised them, and then when I said, okay, now they're old enough to where I can go back to maybe directing movies again, which is obviously my first love and what I wanted to do, that's when I said, well, I can go back and finish the Star Wars story, now that I actually know technically I can do it, and tell the tragedy of Darth Vader, or I can go and make these artsy films that I want to make. And I thought long and hard about it, and went back and forth, and finally said, you know, if I don't do the Star Wars thing now, I'll never get to do it. This is the moment in time. If I put it off 2 or 3 years, it'll be too late. I just won't be able to do it, because this is a 10-year commitment. And so, you know, I'm like 50 years old. I said, you know, if I wait until I'm 55, then I won't be done until I'm 65, and you start worrying about things like that. So I said, okay, I'll finish Star Wars. I might as well do it and get it over, because I think I'll always want to have done it. So I did that, and that's really how the other 3 Star Wars came to be. American Graffiti is a kind of documentary film. Again, it's trying to shoot a particular event, a particular kind of ritual recreated, but it was shot, I shot with 2 cameras, I shot with available light, I shot it very much as if I were shooting a documentary. And I staged it like a documentary. I put the cameras way off, I let the actors play their parts, so it was, I thought of it as a documentary of a particular kind of event that's been recreated. The casting on American Graffiti was a lot of work. I spent 6 months seeing actors every day, 8 hours a day. I'd see them for about 5 minutes, because they were all kids. You know, I didn't have any, you know, they didn't have, some of them had worked before, but most of them hadn't. And so I had to make a quick judgment on whether that was right for the part or not for the part. And then I take various Steve possibilities and various Laurie possibilities, and I mix them all up and let them play against each other, because my feeling was it was an ensemble piece, and I really needed to see how the actors interrelated with each other, how they reacted to each other, and how they fit together, and how they played the scenes together. So it took a very long time, and it was a lot of work, and, you know, came up with a cast that I thought was fantastic, and later turned out to be fantastic.
177, take 2.
It started out with Darth Vader coming in and killing everybody, and then halfway through the movie, his son realizes that he's the hero, but the villain is his father, and then at the end, he redeems his father. That was the movie. Well, it got so big that I couldn't do it, so I only took the first act. And when I took the first act, I promised myself I would finish the other 2 parts of the movie, that no matter what, and no matter how much this one failed, I would get that done. And that was my mission. So everything was geared for Star Wars to fail, and for me to have to fight to get the others done. As it turned out, it succeeded, and I did get the other ones done rather easily. shot the movie in 28 days or nights. We shot only at night. I think there was one day that we shot during the day. It was really hard because we couldn't start until 9 o'clock at night, and it was in July. And at 5 o'clock, the sun came up. So it's not like a movie where you're working during the day, and as it gets later and later at night, you can sort of save a lot of your close-ups and then put some lights in to fake the day. When it's the other way around, you can put up a curtain and stuff, but you're basically stuck because everything in the background, you can't make it go dark. You know, you can make it go light by putting a few lights out there, but you can't make it go dark. So it was very, very difficult. And finished the film. It was a very difficult film to cut because there was, I was intercutting 4 stories and trying to make that work, and I actually ended up cutting an hour of the movie out. The movie itself came out to 2.5 hours when I first did it, and it wouldn't last that long, I knew, so I had to somehow, but every time I took a piece out, it meant all the other pieces had to be taken out too in order to match everything up. So it was very complicated, but in the end, it was also one of the first movies to ever use just music from the radio. Everybody said, you can't do that, but I did it anyway, and now all movies are done that way. Doing THX, Francis Coppola was the producer. We were good friends. He was supposed to be overseeing the picture. He did oversee the picture by letting me do whatever I wanted. The studio saw the picture in the end and went berserk. They said it was terrible. What are we going to do about this? And they were mad at Francis, and they shut down American Zoetrope, and they made him pay all the costs of everything back. Then when I got to do American Graffiti, and they let him be a producer because now he was a hot director because he'd done Godfather, he pretty much did the same thing. I mean, we were in San Francisco. It was a very, very cheap, low-budget movie. The studio didn't want to bother to come up here to check on it. They didn't see it until it was finished. And then they saw American Graffiti when it was finished. We showed it to a bunch of people we got at supermarkets and stuff just to test it. And they just went berserk. They loved it. Studio said, we hate it. It's terrible. You can't show it to an audience. And they were going to put it out as a TV movie for a long time. And then they wanted me to cut it, which is the first THX they wanted me to cut. So we argued back and forth, and I said, I'm not going to touch it. And so that came down to they took out 5 minutes, which made no difference whatsoever. And they did the same thing in American Graffiti. After Star Wars was a giant hit, I went back to Warner Brothers and said, I want to put that 5 minutes back into it before you release it on VHS. And I got it changed back to the way it was. And I did the same thing to Universal with American Graffiti. I said, I want my 5 minutes back. And after Star Wars, they let me do it.
Action.
When I was in junior college, I was a social science major, basically an anthropology major. And I took a lot of anthropology classes, and one of them was on mythology. And I became fascinated with mythology. But I was very interested in anthropology. Why do we do the things that we do? How does society construct itself? When I got to the time of American Graffiti, I was developing that script, but at the same time I was thinking about other ideas. And one of them was to do a Republic serial, an action-adventure film. And I was kind of amused. So what I have a habit of doing, which a lot of writers have a habit of doing, is when you're supposed to be writing on one script, you end up thinking about another script or something that you don't, wouldn't it be great if, instead of doing what you're supposed to be doing. So that was my what if, my sort of avoidance project, which was this Saturday matinee serial project, which I'd come up with doing either a space film, Flash Gordon style, Buck Rogers sort of thing, or a action-adventure film in period, which was like Don Winslow of the Navy or Tim Tyler's Luck, and there's a whole genre there. So I had those two genres I was playing with. And when I went to United Artists to say, I want to do this movie, and they said, okay, we'll give you the 10 grand to write the script. Do you have any other movies? Which is what studios do. And they want to hook you up for the rest of your life if you go there. So I said, well, yeah, I got this idea for a kind of maybe a space adventure, because I'd sort of picked that one out of the two that I wanted to do. And they said, okay, we'll make a deal for that too. So I had a 2-picture deal when I got the deal for American Graffiti. But of course, when I took American Graffiti to them, they said, no, we don't want that. And so then I finished American Graffiti, and then before it came out, because it was sitting fallow at the studio, and nobody wanted to have anything to do with it, and everybody heard it was terrible. I said, well, I want to do Star Wars now. And they said, no, we don't want to do that now. So I said, okay. So then I had to take it to Universal because they had the next 12 pictures I had. And I told them, of course, they hated me at that point. And I said, I want to do Star Wars. And they said, no, we don't want to do that. But fortunately, Alan Ladd Jr. at 20th Century Fox had seen American Graffiti in one of those screenings. And he said, you got a picture. I think you're a really talented guy. Do you have something you want to do? And I said, well, I've been trying to shop around this little science fiction. It's more of a space fantasy kind of thing, soap opera. And they said, or space opera. And he said, okay, well, I'll do it. So that's how I got that deal. And I explained the story to him and said, look, I don't understand what you're talking about, but I think you're a talented guy, and I'll do it. All art is based on technology. That's the whole point of art. It's just the thing that man does, which is it's just the same as if you're drawing cave paintings of antelope, and you're doing it in black charcoal, and suddenly somebody gives you some orange charcoal. So now you have black and orange charcoal, and it just completely doubles your ability to tell stories. All artists bang up against that technology, and when you do, it's extremely frustrating. Fantasy, science fiction, these are literary works. These are things that you depend on people's imagination to conjure up dreamlike, otherworldly existences. The problem with cinema is you have to make that real for a moment in time. I kind of liked fantasy films after I did Star Wars. I said, this was great, but I was constantly banging up against the technological ceiling. And it was frustrating because there were a lot of great movies and things that could be done. And at that point, the movie industry was trapped in this world of basically contemporary movies. You could do contemporary movies. You couldn't do period pieces because there wasn't enough of an audience there to do it. So when we started breaking through using digital technology to see that we could do digital backgrounds, that we could do digital characters, and then eventually when we got to Phantom Menace, that I could actually get digital characters to act, which is a big leap. It doesn't seem, well, what's the difference between a dinosaur and Jar Jar Binks? And once you did that, then I wasn't stuck with these funny masks, which is, animatronic figures, which were not, we were advancing them because we'd also taken the leap with Yoda and created the first animatronic character that could actually be lifelike.
Just 1 second.
But it was limited. I couldn't get him to run around or anything. He was basically a puppet, and otherwise you have to put a guy in a suit.
That's good, Graham.
And it's very limited. But once you got to the digital level of being able to create a character, he can do anything. He can go anywhere, do anything. It's fantastic. And suddenly that opened a whole world of new characters, fantasy films, period pictures where you needed 1,000 troops, marching over the hill. All kinds of things were suddenly opened up that you couldn't touch 10 years earlier. And so that was exciting, and we saw it progress. Every 6 months or so, we'd come up with a new step. We'd go to the next step, and we'd try another thing. And during that period, I was producing some films like Willow, where we were pushing the envelope. I would just, say, why don't we try this and see if we can get this to work? So a lot of it was experimental, but it was fun because I knew that I was freeing up the medium so you could sort of think of all kinds of projects and all kinds of ideas and be open to big epic projects that weren't going to cost a huge amount of money, that you could actually, tell those stories.
Action!
It's hard because there's so many great, fantastic movies. When I was in film school, my favorite movies were things like Hard Day's Night and Dr. Strangelove and Seven Samurai and Breathless. And, if you said today, I wouldn't know even what to say because that was when I first got into movies. And my range was very small. I only knew a few thousand movies, but now I knew 100,000 movies. And I would say at least 10,000 were fantastic, and I want to take them all. I still love to tell stories. I still love cinema. I still love to work in the medium and try to tell stories using the moving image rather than just words. and experiment to figure out how to do that, and how to manipulate the images to do what I want them to do. Because it's a very fascinating storytelling medium that basically has not been exploited yet. I mean, first 100 years of cinema is very crude and not very interesting, as far as I'm concerned. What's going to happen 100 years from now is what's going to really be amazing.